Welcome back, everybody, to Beyond Barriers podcast. I'm Jeff Scoop with my co-host Acacia Dietz, and our special guest on this program today is Nick Daines from England. Hi, Nick. How you doing?
Hi, Jeff. Thanks so much for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure to join you both.
Thanks for coming. Could you tell us a little bit, share a little bit about your background and what it is that you do over there?
Sure, yeah, thanks as well. So my kind of professional background is, I've been a psychiatric nurse for some time. When I was first studying, I did that to complement the degree that I was doing. So I've worked in some very acute mental health environments, working with people that have very poor mental health, and then for some time after that went into business, but found that was really unrewarding, if you like. So I've always been pulled back to working with people, and found my kind of calling really where I was working with young people, young offenders, and trying to help them discover new opportunities. So I was essentially a care officer in a secure young offenders centre, and while I was there, an opportunity arose to work with the UK government Prevent programme, which is part of their four-strand counter-terrorism strategy. So that was a new kind of part of this contest strategy that looked to try to intervene, if you like, or prevent homegrown terrorism. So that sort of emerged and evolved out of the attacks that happened on 7/7 in London, on the buses and tube trains in London, and really tries to look for the kind of early contributors, early factors involved where people are being drawn into extreme groups and being radicalised into kind of different violent ideologies. So it's trying to prevent violent extremism. So I've specialised in that since 2008, really, and currently providing mentoring to the Home Office, the Department of Homeland Security, because we've adopted the American version for our security teams as well. So I've worked with Homeland Security as one of a handful of intervention providers, if you like, working around the UK.
And that was one of the things that I was so excited to talk with you about too, is because I remember we had discussed this, the mentorship program and what you do, because what you're doing is very similar to the work that we're doing here in the US. So I was definitely looking forward to asking you some of these questions and discuss for the listening audience, how well does that mentorship work? Like, in your experiences, you've been doing this for a long time. Like, what has your experience been with it? Has it been very effective, or?
That's a really good question, Jeff. I think quantifying what we do is really, really important, and looking to kind of give tangible evidence of the outcomes that we're achieving is really important. Because similarly to kind of work you guys do in the States, it's important to have those layers of support when people are looking to disengage and exit from a group. I would say 80%, a solid 80% of the people that I work with will, they kind of disengage from their journey, if you like. So when I approach people, and the way that I approach the mentoring that I do, is I'm not looking to turn around someone's political attitudes or turn them from someone who thinks, in a very kind of right-wing mentality. I'm not looking to turn them into someone with entirely opposite views. I'm looking to disengage them from a violent mindset. And often that kind of support and opportunity for them to have their say, to express why they feel like they do, is really useful, so that they're able to get someone who can understand, who can really draw out some of the things that have encouraged them into those particular groups. While there are obviously a lot of similarities, as I'm sure you well know, with why people become engaged in a violent ideological worldview, there's always individual reasons. So it's showing the support for those individual people and treating people as a kind of important one-to-one situation, rather than trying to put people in boxes.
Now, would you say that, like, the majority of the people that you work with, because I know you've worked with youth, you've worked with adults, kind of a little bit, a whole lot, a whole lot, um,
Yeah.
but the majority of the individuals that you do the one-on-one with now, are they more like younger, or are they adults? Are they youth, or are they adults? Or both?
They do tend to be younger adults. Yeah.
Okay.
So, um, I, it's not frequent, but I've worked with young people sort of around 12 upwards.
Okay.
That's not the kind of norm by any stretch of the imagination. It tends to be maybe sort of 14, more towards late 20s, and then kind of other, less so, but still I've worked with a group that can maybe late 30s all the way up
Okay.
to people in their 60s.
Wow.
But, and again, people's circumstances are really individual. So I've had mentoring sessions with people that have had a lot of life experiences that things have just kind of collapsed in on them, and really they're looking
Wow.
for circumstance. They're looking for people to blame their circumstances, if you like. So it's trying to understand that and why people are drawn into that kind of group.
Now, I know you had sent on your bio, it had talked about safe frontiers. And I real quick wanted to cover that series, and I will put a link to it in our description for the podcast. But if
Right.
you can explain to the viewers kind of what the mission of Safe Frontiers is, and how that came about.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking about that as well. I mean, I've that came about so with someone I worked with. So it's a young person I was mentoring that is a legitimate genius. He's highly intelligent. He's been through terrible neglect with family members. So mum would be very neglectful of him and his two brothers. And
Mm.
he was in a really bad state of mind when we first started working together. He had agency burnout. Everybody in the whole range of services had tried to reach him, mental health services, youth services, and Safer Frontiers came about as part of our kind of online safety project. So he and I put our efforts together and really tried to tackle the kind of increase in online extremism. As I'm sure you guys are going to be familiar with, like the online space, we've seen it grow. It's such a
Yeah.
powerful tool for these kind of groups to recruit and to influence others, often by really kind of devious means.
Yeah.
So we wanted to just try to share a little bit of our respective knowledge, um, and it's been really productive in the sense that people kind of look. Their expectation of me is like, I'm an older guy. I've been in the kind of industry for some time, and the impact comes with when professionals can talk with a young person, someone who's been immersed in the kind of online space, and really hear the genuine experiences and the ways that kind of these groups will manipulate, or how easy it is for people to be manipulated online,
Right.
and the kind of information available. So the series of films that we did was intended to give voice to young people, and update the kind of the kind of really stifled, really kind of like not very dynamic safety films that were out there that were being produced by like government organisations. So we worked with a group of young people who are filmmakers in Leicester, in the UK, and they developed these films with our support and guidance, but from their own kind of experiences.
Hmm.
So it's a series of 4 films that look at different aspects of online safety, and grooming. And I think that's kind of an important
It's a huge one. Yeah.
connection that's not realised when professionals have dialogue about radicalisation, sexual exploitation. That the grooming process is very much part of gang mentality, about ideological radicalisation.
Yeah.
These groups seek to really gain trust and then eventually exploit that person through a process of grooming.
Yeah, and I highly recommend anybody to take a look at them. Like I said, the link will be in the bio and then the description. But yeah, it gives a different perspective. I think there's a lot of times, you know, while we're covering youth right now, is that, you know, the youth will watch something or parents will watch something, and having the youth play in it and actually telling that story, I think is very impactful for both the youth and the adults, because the adults look at it and it triggers something different because they're viewing things maybe from through their child's eyes versus through, I'm an adult, you're a kid, you should just go with whatever I say and be okay with it. Here, this is how easy this can happen. I know I showed Jeff the one about the little boy that got the Xbox, and then his friend wanted him to come over, but he wasn't to say anything to his parents. And it's, you know, those things happen all the time. I have three younger, well, they're not so little anymore. My youngest is 12, my oldest is 16. But even my 12-year-old, when he's on like playing Call of Duty on, you know, the PlayStation and whatnot, he's always on chat. And I'm like, I've gone over with all of them. Obviously, you do not give out your address, you do not give out anything. And, you know, if there is anything, you either come to me or come to your older brother, and then they'll come to me, whichever. But, you know, those are the uncomfortable conversations that we as parents have to have with our kids. And I think these videos are a good place to start. If any parent is wanting to talk to their kids about some of these situations, these videos would be a great place to start. And I saw in one thing, they did win some awards. Is that correct for the series?
That's
or at
right,
least
yeah.
several,
They've been very
several of them?
successful. Yeah, they've been really, really successful actually. Yeah, and they made it as far as Mexico and New York, so the New York Film Festival,
Oh,
and we
wow.
won several awards at the Into film in 2019 produced. So obviously COVID has held things up. But what you're kind of mentioning about these uncomfortable conversations, they're good. Those films are a good way to bridge that gap, if you like, and become a kind of discussion point.
Exactly.
And yeah, we have to empower this generation who are molding the internet to
Yeah.
be comfortable and confident with speaking up about things that they find are not accessible.
Yep.
Because our mission, if you like, is to ensure people realise there's no police in the internet. You know, there's so many people who are using this wonderful resource, but
Yeah.
the kind of uses for a sinister purpose are there, and we have to acknowledge those. And a lot of the people that participate in our educational work are shocked or surprised. You know, it's, you know, the old, it's got a shock value to these things, because parents are often either kind of wrapped up in the pressures that they have to deal with as parents, and they don't have time to talk about what young people see online. And it's amazing, like you mentioned, that when we produced this series of films, the amount of friends that I had that said, "Oh, you know, my son or my
Yes.
daughter," has like had conversations with it. You know, it affects so many people, and being aware of the warning signs, it's really important. You know,
Absolutely.
and the isolation, like you mentioned, you know, for young people, it's a difficult time, you know, developing over adolescence, and often young people can feel so isolated. When people are then there to say, you know, I'm just like you, or I've been through this, and I identify with where you're coming from, or I like the same music as you do, you know, whatever it might be, they're building that trust, and then trying to separate them from parental or friendship kind of relationships. So,
especially
yeah,
during.
really appreciate you putting that up there, Acacia. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think especially with COVID and all that, you know, it's incredibly important that people see films like that as well. And like you had said about engaging the youth, having them in there, having them talk about it, it gives them a platform, and that's something that everybody, I think, wants. Everybody wants to be heard. They want their voice to be heard. And a lot of times, people that are going into these extremist organizations, it's a bit of a motivation for them as well. Is that they feel like they're going to be heard. Their grievances, their voices are going to be heard, and um, it's important that people are heard, but not in that manner. not in the manner of getting involved in extremism. So I think it's so important what the work that you're doing over there, and well, the work that we're all doing, and I think that mentorship, I really think, coming back to that's a really important thing as well, because I think it helps a lot. And as you said earlier, not telling people that they're wrong, so to speak, or going in there like you're going to change them. That stuff is all going to come later. But as our colleague Daryl Davis says, he'll a lot of times when they cover his work, they'll say, he changed all these people. I didn't change nobody. I just gave him a different way of looking at things. And that's our policy. That's kind of how we do things with Beyond Barriers too, is we listen, we hear what they're saying, and we offer them different ways of looking at different perspectives and different ways of looking at things. They've got to make up their minds for themselves. No one's going to stay out of that lifestyle if they think you force them to change, or that they had to change or something like that. You want them to realize it on their own, and then you're going to have a lasting effect on it. I think with the mentorship program, I think it's really good.
Yes, it's definitely, that is the way it is. And like I say, Darryl mentioned that, and the work that we do collectively, I think being there as part of someone's journey and encouraging them to kind of make the right choices, or encouraging them to question everything, question information. I never ask people to believe what I have to say. I ask people to think independently, and like encouraging kind of critical analysis.
Right.
What I come up against, Jeff, quite a lot as well, is this kind of like the pseudo-intelligent way of argument for justifying average intelligence, the IQ testing and things like that. And it's such a easy concept to deconstruct, because even the guy who created these tests said they're not meant to be an indicator of like average intelligence. They're used to identify people who need educational support. Intelligence changes, it's not fixed. All these kind of different ways of looking at some of the arguments that the extreme right wing or Islamist ideologues will use to try and separate and distinguish between the other. Like we're superior and they're inferior. It's very similar arguments often across the board, used to try and separate people and stop them having conversations like we're having.
Right. Now, over in the UK, do you deal more with like right-wing extremism or far-right extremism, the ideology, or jihadi, the Muslim extremism, or is it's just kind of a mix?
I did begin the kind of work that I was doing, providing mentoring for all different types of ideological extremism. So I've worked initially with a lot of young men who were being drawn into gangs, but were identifying as Muslim. So a lot of young offenders who were part of gangs that would commit horrendously violent crimes, and then kind of talk to me about their faith, or how they perceive their faith and their identity. But I was, tasked with kind of working more with far-right extremists. So I come from a kind of like behavioural psychology perspective. So looking at motivators, like we said, why are people kind of motivated to engage with this way of thinking and these kind of worldviews? And I think, like I say, there are similarities across all violent ideology. And something that I was really proud of Craig McCann for highlighting is that there are more than just Islamist and far-right violent ideologies out there. And the sooner that people start having a communication about that uncomfortable truth, the better. Because, obviously, as we look to America, we see the kind of protests that happen and the division in the kind of politics going on in the US at the moment. And that's being played out in exactly the same way in the UK, but people are pitching each other on one side of, or either end of an extremism type of argument, and the middle ground gets lost. And that's social media polarizes that so well. And it's this kind of old, eternal thing of either you're with us or against us. If you don't agree
Right.
with us, then you're like obviously against us. And it makes it so difficult then to have constructive discussion with people, particularly on the extreme left as well, because I've got people, guys and women that I've worked with, that they can barely, utter a sentence before they're being labelled as a bigot. So, that's a really got to be part of the dialogue that goes on as well. It's the kind of various different types of extremism.
And we've seen that in the United States too, and it's really troubling, because a lot of times when I point things like that out, they'll say, well, and you point out that there's extremes on all the different sides, and they say, well, the side that they agree with is not as bad as the other one, or they'll say, well, the right killed more people, or here or there. They make these kind of excuses, and it's like, hey, we're not trying to play a game here of who's worse, or or who's better. All of those, when you get into the extremes, are bad. And when you can't see the person sitting across from you or standing across from you as a human being, and you just see them as right or wrong, we're seeing that on a level in the United States right now where it's so bad that both sides aren't talking to each other. And I'm not talking about Nazis and communists. I'm talking about Democrats and Republicans, right? That they're getting more and more radical and heading towards those extremes and not wanting to talk to one another. We need more and more sensible people going towards the center, or you could be center right, center left. It doesn't matter. And then the same could be said with religions. It's like when you get to that extreme where you start dehumanizing others, it's not good for humanity. It's not good for our country. So, I mean, these discussions, I think, are so incredibly important, and we have to realize that we all don't have to agree either. We're all, how boring would it be if everybody agreed with everything? But that there's more nuance to it than a lot of people would like to see.
Don't tell that to a woman. You guys agree with everything we say.
That's different. That's a whole other conversation.
That's it. That's an entirely different show.
Yeah.
but it's for our own good, Casey. I
Right.
think that we have to. We have to agree.
So, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, and I know you can't, we don't give details and names or anything like that, but this is a two-part question. One of your greatest successes and one of the greatest fails as far as doing this kind of work, and obviously not names, but just maybe generalized story. What if you have an answer on that one?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I think the important part is that the general public don't get to hear about the brilliant successes that myself and colleagues have, because there's quite a vocal anti-prevent lobby in the UK. So see what the program is doing as invasive or coercive, things like that. Whereas in reality, it's entirely voluntary. People don't. I try to use my winning personality to engage with people. But definitely one of the greatest successes I've had has been. There's been quite a few, and I often work with people that are, I call them tinkerers. So they're tinkering around with explosives, and they're highly intelligent, and they're making, as young men and women, but predominantly young men have done, is they like to experiment with things. And one of the guys that I've worked with who's turned things around really significantly is someone who was planning to make pipe bombs and use those at demonstrations when he was a lot younger. His family were quite chaotic, and he was engaging with a very well-known street movement in the UK, a group called Britain First. There are more higher-the-line groups out there, but obviously there's quite a few popularist movements in the UK as well. And he was going along to their demonstrations, and he was very close to leaving explosive devices at planned mosque building, mosque sites in the UK. So he was very much attack planning, and was able to engage with him and really kind of show the value of his what he had to offer, and the intelligence he had. This is 99 times out of 100. There's people that are so intelligent, got a lot to offer people. They just haven't maybe heard it, or they've heard, you're disruptive, problem child, or things like this, rather than people playing to their strengths. Or education obviously is certain ways it's a one size fits all approach.
Right.
So that they're often either sort of seen as compliant or disruptive. And this guy was highly intelligent but very disruptive, and he was being influenced by these kind of groups. But now, and there's an interview that's available we did together, that he moved from a very racialized perspective on life to actually, one of his partners was a black African girl, and they started a family together, and they're very happily in a relationship.
Oh.
So whenever I speak to him, that kind of reminds me that, and him, that he's been able to bridge the differences that he's had, with people. And it's not only that, he's kind of, looking after, and he's a brilliant dad. But that opportunity could have so easily been missed, if you like.
Yeah.
But also, in terms of failures, there was a huge series of legal cases in the UK with people who were being drawn into a very serious group that did prescribed. They were the first far-right group to be prescribed by the government in the UK. So that tells you something, because we've had groups like Combat 18 and Area Strike Force, and some really hard-line kind of groups that were very vocal. So they were the first group to get banned, and they were actively recruiting people who had capability. So like we've seen with Atom Waffen and groups on the base, they were looking to find people to recruit with particular military backgrounds, policing backgrounds, kind of insinuating themselves into those roles. So again, not going into too much detail, but I have worked with several people in that circle, and some of whom have kind of mocked the prevent process. And again, encouraging people on their journey. I've said to those people, what you think and what choices you make when I'm gone is entirely up to you. And I'm not going to cry into my pillow at night if you make the wrong decisions in your life, because you're an adult, someone who's old enough to make their own decisions. And some of those decisions have come back to haunt the individuals involved. But they had the opportunity, and they chose a different route. So I do sometimes feel a sense, not regret, but a missed opportunity. I think is probably what I'd say about those.
The reason I asked that too is because you can't get everyone out, and our rate of success is similar to what you had said. I mean, the vast majority stay out, and as the success story that you just mentioned, how many potential lives were saved because of that? That's why it's so important, this work. And of course there's critics, and there's people that doubt the work and criticize the work, and they'll say, well, this person went back, and they make a big deal out of that, but they don't make a big deal usually out of the successes. And the public doesn't know that. They don't know that this person that you off-ramped, and I know that's what pushes us to do this work as well, is because we don't know. It's not about saving that one individual. That's nice. That's helpful. That's a good thing. But it's about saving all the potential innocents that could be, their lives could be taken for no reason because of somebody who's radicalized into these ideologies. So I think that's why it's so incredibly important. And of course, there's going to be fails, and I don't feel like that's necessarily the service provider. I don't feel like not everybody, we can't make these decisions for everyone. They have to make it themselves, and they'll regret those decisions later if they do go back. But the good news and the positive news is that there's more successes than there's fails, and I wish more people would know that. So thank you so much for sharing some of those experiences with us.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I've been looking forward to speaking with you both for a long time. And it is just, as you say, trying to avoid those instances where people are caught up in the actions of angry, frustrated, resentful people, trying to ensure that lives aren't lost. And I think people don't take the work of Prevent seriously, in the respect that we are actively disengaging people from those kinds of way of thinking, from violent outcomes, and that is kind of like the tangible result, is to try and ensure that we don't see attacks like the one that David Copeland perpetrated. I mean, that's particularly horrific clues into nail bombs and things like that around London. And Netflix, I don't know whether you've seen that, but Netflix have done a series on, I think it's called Catching the Pipe Bomber. But that's quite a high profile case that we had, and there's been plenty more that aren't as publicised, because the popular media tend to focus on the Islamist threats. Meanwhile, there's been lots of people in other areas of radical thinking that are, again, tinkering around with pipe bombs and making explosives on farms and things like that. Particularly in rural areas in the UK as well, I think are neglected, where people have access to the kind of materials that they need. And of course, we've all, at a certain age, experienced the troubles in Northern Ireland as well, which I lived through. That was horrific times, and touched so many friends and family. I think a lot of people in the UK. So we're very familiar with these kind of domestic extremism cases. That was one of the motives for me getting into this work, was that I want to try and steer people away from acting in those ways.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was actually, you kind of just answered a little bit. I was just going to ask you what led you down the road to get involved in working in like counter-extremism and Prevent and all of that. Now, is that something that you had initially knew that you wanted to go into, or is it something that developed along the professional path that you took?
Yeah, I'm very much the case. I'm really lucky to have had this opportunity. I was in the right place at the right time, to find my ideal role. I think I was very, very lucky. It specialised in the Prevent project allowed myself and a colleague in the Young Offenders Centre to specialise in understanding violent extremism and extreme violence, and we use that remit to examine and explore kind of behaviour around gang crime and things like that, and particularly the issue that we were confronting at the time was very violent young offenders that committed acts of murder or attempted murder, very serious crime, and that kind of mindset, how easily influenced a lot of the time these young people were. So it really was a great opportunity, and I'd always had an interest in kind of current affairs, and also the counter-terrorism field, particularly. When I was young, there was a situation that happened in Northern Ireland that really had burned its way into my consciousness, when a particular church was attacked in Northern Ireland. Women and children were attending the service there, and it's just that resonated with me so deeply. And again, as I say, I personally have had friends or family affected through that process in Northern Ireland, and know so many people that have as well. And I've worked a lot with ex-service personnel as well, that's often experienced really terrible trauma. That was partly a route in as well through the kind of mental health work that I was doing. And again, I was experiencing a lot of just violence on a day-to-day basis in those kind of environments. But working with people and trying to help them with their individual journey as well was something that I was always really been quite keen to do. So being able to come back into that kind of line of work, as I say, I was working in a commercial environment for quite some time and really did not feel the sense of reward. And doing well, but not really fulfilling the purpose that I felt that I needed to, and the kind of calling, which has always been to work with people.
That's awesome.
I've got a question. I had heard there was some enhancements on sentencing over there in England with people that were involved in some of the band groups and things like that. And there's been different talk on that. And I was just curious, and maybe you don't have an answer on this one, or but with some of those enhanced sentences, and I'm thinking of a case in my mind of someone that I'm familiar with. But with those sentences, with the young people that are being convicted on, say, those being a member of a banned organization or a terror organization, what is their are you seeing it when they finally do get out, or in that process? Do the people stay out of the movement when they get out, or do they become more hardline after spending time in jail, especially if it's a long period?
That is, yeah, I think we're about to see more evidence, unfold, Jeff, about that kind of stuff, because um, the kind of sentencing of people involved in extreme right-wing groups has been fairly recent. Previously, sentencing has been around offences like uh, planning to use or make or engage with explosives. So it's been explosive charges rather than any particular ideological group.
Right.
And I think that what I've seen anecdotally from people who've been in prison, they've had different experiences. Sometimes people have worked with or had interactions with people that they're forced to interact with, that they have said previously they would never want to speak with, or hell would freeze over until they spoke to a person from a certain background. That they've been pushed together, and that has sometimes been the most productive or the most unusually productive thing ever. But I think we're going to see these cases evolving very soon, because people have been sentenced fairly recently will start to be released, and we have a way of trying to provide support and intervention around those people who've been in secure environments through a program called DDP, which is a kind of enhanced part, working with people that are on terrorism prevention packages and terrorism prevention orders, that they're quite intense interventions with them and things like that. But I think there's potentially people that are going to be reinforced in their kind of anti-government narrative.
Yeah.
And I think there's different approaches in prisons or HMPs in the UK where that some of these groups are separated, and of course that creates an opportunity for hot housing as well. Instead of interaction or engagement, I guess you might have seen similar situations in the US where wings are dedicated to like the Aryan Brotherhoods, or the kind of like the Hispanic kind of gang perpetrators and black perpetrators, and they're all separated on different kind of wings of prisons. I think that's potentially dangerous, but there's certain safeguarding elements of that. And as we see more people going into prison for these kinds of ideological offence, and they have been quite serious. The sentences given have been pretty stiff. As to make an example, because there's been some very serious plots, to kill MPs and things like that. So I think that was put out there as an example that we will take extreme right wing related offences very seriously. And like I say, I think there'll be an emerging group of people that might well be increasingly resentful. Yeah, really good question. And I think
it's a tough one. Yeah, it's a tough one, because I mean, I was thinking, with some of those, that if they were involved in bomb making or plotting murders or things like that would cause mass casualties, anything like that, I think you have to, and this is just my opinion, of course, but I think you have to be strict with those people. But I was thinking of some of the other ones that were just members of these particular groups that are now banned. And I don't have all the details on the cases or anything like that, but I've heard different stories, and I often wondered about those people. Like, I know they're being made an example out of, but I often wonder, how will they react after they've been in prison for a long time? I know here's some of the struggles here in the U.S. with some of the guys that get out. There's a case that we're working on, a number of them actually, but one I'm thinking of in particular, and the guy's covered head to toe in swastika tattoos and things like that he got in prison. And now he's out, can't get a job, has a hard time finding a place that'll even rent a room to him, and those are some of the challenges. And there's not a lot of support networks, or almost no support networks in the United States to help folks like that. So these are just some of the things I think we as the international community in general has to evaluate and look at. So I was just curious thoughts on that. And what do you think about global cooperation as far as in the field? Like, I know we're having the conversation now, but what do you think about cooperating as far as that sort of thing?
Yeah, really going to be really important. Even kind of before the increasing popularity of the internet, there's influence, from across kind of Europe and America. Often the trends in the US impact on the UK, and sometimes vice versa as well. But certainly, even pre sort of social media days, like the Blood and Honor music group, or the music kind of collective that is Blood and Honor, would tour Eastern Europe and other countries that are very ultra nationalist, and there's cross pollination with a lot of the groups that's we've seen as well. There's been a movement towards mixed martial arts and this kind of notion of needing to defend obviously honour, the blood, soil, that kind of cornerstone of extreme right wing ideology. So I think to try to counter these kind of narratives, obviously they're easy to share, easy to spread these days. The communication that is going on is increasing exponentially, because members of the group that we were talking about, the band group in the UK, were reaching out to members of in Iron March on that site, different kind of divisions around Atomwaffen, the misanthropic division, obviously conflicts, the likes which we're seeing in Ukraine. That gives opportunity as well for people to go and improve their knowledge, or kind of their capability and understanding of weapons and how to kind of make explosives and things like that. I think it's really important that we're all representing a global conversation about this, because certainly the US is, for me, there's been a huge issue with domestic extremism for a long, long time, and even kind of like being aware of groups like National Alliance for a long time, Northwest Alliance. I don't know whether that's something that is a group that's still significant, but there's a lot of different groups, and like so with the political landscape at the moment, it's something I think that is a collective challenge, because people are being pushed not only in the US but across the world globally to these extremes, to like one side of an extreme argument or another. And for years as well, I've banged the drum about the influence of Putin, and a lot of the far right groups and members in this country look to Russia as the mothership. Very socially conservative, religiously conservative society, that's anti-LGBT, anti-diverse culture, and they look to Russia as the kind of like shining light of social conservatism, if you like. Right. And football hooliganism has been increasing in Russia in popularity, and they look to the UK. So there's this kind of like complementary cultures where British soccer hooliganism, or football hooliganism as we call it, has cross-pollinated with Russian hooliganism as well. And that kind of boiled over. It was the Euro Championships in 2017 in France, where you had groups of Russian hooligans who were clearly, for me, it looked like they'd had special forces training and stuff. The way that they operated was very brutal on often crowds of casual drinkers that they'd sweep in and start a huge riot. And yeah, the way they were operating was very slick and very well drilled. But those kinds of cultural crossover groups that are in the MMA arena, like I don't know whether you've heard of White Rex, but like they're a really concerning group. They're promoting white only mixed martial arts, and had quite a period of popularity within groups in the UK. Yeah, so I mean, there's various different aspects of the kind of global culture that I think we're not collaborating together, then we're going to stand no chance of countering these things.
Absolutely. I'm finding that more and more. I monitor a lot of different chatter and stuff, especially in things like Telegram and whatnot. And because of the online world and the internet now, you can connect with the click of a button all over the world. So a lot of these groups that might not have had other connects other than just in the United States or even maybe in their own state now can connect with Russia, Ukraine, with, all over, really, Australia, New Zealand. And I've realized, like, I'll go into them, and at first, because typically we're used to dealing within our own countries, and then you'll start to realize, like, oh no, this person's in here and this group's over here, but it's all interconnected, and it's all about making connections. And if there's a way to kind of disrupt those connections to some degree, that works. And I know you mentioned like the Atomwaffen and the base and whatnot, and accelerationism is what I call it, but that form of right-wing extremism seems to be really, really taken off. And I know it's took off here, but as I look and I watch, it's global, really. And you can have a small cell, but a small cell can do a lot of terroristic damage. And so have you noticed an uptick in like right-wing extremism activity or just extremist activities in general there in the UK? Because I know, like, at least here in the US, it's going haywire because of the political division and everything, and it's a mess right now, really. So I was just curious in the UK if you've seen some of that also, or if it's just kind of how it's always been, if it's more or less.
Definitely, Kasia, yeah, there's been, I think it's consistently increasing at the moment, and there are international and domestic issues that contributing to that. Obviously, the UK have been trying to cement a kind of decent border policy. We've had lots of polarisation around political issues like Brexit and becoming a kind of independent from the European Union again. I think that's contributed massively to the polarisation on the political divide as well. But definitely, you mentioned like the accelerationism, and that figures hugely into there's big crossovers with certain incel mentality and people that are really disaffected online. I've seen that increasing hugely, where there are havens, obviously boards, chan sites and message board sites often havens for these kind of communities, where people are feeling that sense of futility. It's a theme that's run through extreme right-wing thinking in the more harder-line groups, burn the whole house down and let's start again. And that has become really kind of the popular narrative recently. That sense of futility seems to be really pervasive, or really kind of like coming through, particularly online. So I'd say that there was a huge kind of increase in this kind of activity a few years ago, and it's been then consistently being fed for the past 2 or 3 years through the kind of political landscape and developing circumstances, and and now obviously economic hardship as well is going to kick in as a result of this kind of conglomeration of things, and people become, I think, even more resentful. And tough times, and people start looking for people to blame, don't they? So
I want to thank you for joining us today. Was there anything else before we let you go that you would like to discuss or mention on the program, Nick?
look, Jeff, I'm just so proud of the work that you're doing, and really kind of following avidly both your excellent kind of contribution. And, I just hope, like you said, we can continue having collective dialogues between people, putting people together, and having these kind of discussions, because through the work that we do, it reinvigorates that sense of people are generally good, and it does have an impact. It is important work, and we are doing really positive things for people, providing that kind of support, the right kind of support that people need as well. So keep up that excellent work, and just kind of like putting people together. Really, really good to see. And I do hope that I can either give you a tour of London or the UK with its accents, and we can continue our kind of like relationship as well. It's been a privilege to come on your podcast. Thank you both very, very much.
Thank you for coming on.